Have you ever heard anyone say that the language on the JLPT N1 is very specific to just the N1? Or if you never studied specifically for the N1, you're gonna have a really hard time passing it? I know I've heard it a lot, and I've actually repeated it quite a few times, but I wanted to see what it was really like. So this past Saturday, I went and took the JLPT N1, and this is what it was really like. So to start, I was completely wrong. I used to really believe that the N1 had just a lot of stupid vocabulary that you'd never encounter in real life, and it just wasn't gonna be useful to people, and it wasn't gonna be a good indicator of, how much real Japanese you could use or that you understood. So to see if that was true, what I did was I didn't actually study for the N1 at all. I did take one practice test, but I didn't check any of my answers, and I didn't look up any words that I didn't know. I just took it to get an idea of what the format was like, so I didn't have to worry about that. I could factor that out on the day of. But other than that, I didn't study any vocabulary. I didn't buy any grammar books for the N1. I didn't do any reading from Japanese N1 reading practice books, although I did buy a bunch. I never even opened them. And I didn't even really read any news or watch any TV. Now, it has to be said as a disclaimer here that I have lived in Japan for quite a long time, and I've taught N5 to N2 grammar, but I've actually never touched N1 material. I've never taught it, I've never studied it, I've never touched it. I've never done anything for N1. So what I did do to prepare was, instead of studying for the N1, I just played a bunch of video games, I played visual novels, I did a manga challenge where I read manga all day every day for a month, or not all day, I think it was 4 hours a day for a month, and that's about it. So yes, I do have a base, and you can't forget that, but I did no N1 specific studying at all. And honestly, when I signed up for the N1, my reading ability was actually pretty poor. I've always been a pretty confident speaker in Japanese because I've had to speak it for so many years, but I've never really focused much on reading because I just wasn't interested in reading Japanese that much. But over the past couple of years, I've decided that I want to try, and since I finished teaching quartet this past year, I finally decided to focus on that, and that's why I've been doing certain challenges like playing DS all day every day for a year or for a month in Japanese, or doing the manga challenge, and that's helped improve my speed a lot. But when I signed up for the N1, my reading was pretty bad actually. I was pretty slow. I had forgotten a lot of kanji, stuff like that. And that's actually an important point, because doing all that extra reading and all those challenges, what I felt was that it helped improve my reading speed a lot, which you're gonna see later is actually a big part of the N1, but we'll get to that later. So yeah, it's funny because I was talking to my wife on the day of the test, the morning of. I was saying how this grammar point, zaru oenai, shows up all the time in the current visual novel I'm playing, which is Steins Gate, and it showed up a lot when I was reading a bunch of manga every day as well, zaru oenai. And I'd never studied that grammar point, and I'd never really encountered it much. At least, I haven't really read a lot, and I've never encountered it in conversation and stuff. And I was joking, I was saying, imagine if that's a big N1 point. And sure enough, it showed up 3 or 4 times on the actual test. And it was an important grammar point, it was one of the questions. So I thought that was funny, and I was writing a letter, an important letter, a message or something, and I asked her to check one of the sentences to see if there was a better way to put it, because I felt like I was missing something, and she suggested I change one of the adverbs to tachimachi, which means in an instant, all of a sudden. And that showed up on the test. That was 3 days later. It showed up on the test, and it was in one of the answers, and I knew what it meant from just because I was writing a letter. So there's 2 things that show up every day in my reading and just in day-to-day life that were important parts of questions on the N1. The truth is that I can't even count how many words that showed up on the N1 that I didn't know 6 months ago. And the only reason I know them now is because I encountered them in that manga, in the visual novels, in the games, the 3DS games that I played. All of these, tons of new words that were on the N1. I was yeah, I know that word, but I don't think I did a year ago or 6 months ago. This is all new stuff for me. And it's all stuff that I got in real life. In other words, I feel pretty confident that I passed the test. I felt confident answering a lot of these questions. I felt like I understood clearly everything I was reading in the long reading sections. I felt confident on it. I'm 99% sure that I passed, and I'm 99% sure it's because I played a bunch of video games and read a bunch of manga. So, who would have thought, right? I think that right off the bat proves that the language on the N1 isn't just super specific to the N1. I no longer believe that. There were a few words that I did not know in the reading sections, But even those looking at them, like, they didn't seem like they were super rare words. Like, I didn't see a ton of just off the cuff, like, stupid words that you'd only see at the back of a newspaper in like something super specific. It's a terrible example, but you get what I'm saying? Another thing that surprised me about the test is that there was a lot more people taking the N1 than any of the other levels. Now, it has to be mentioned that I am in Japan, so that might be part of it. I'd love to hear what your experience was if you've taken the JLPT outside of Japan. Like, are a lot more people taking the other levels? I'm not sure. I've never taken it outside of the country, but I feel like outside of Japan, it's probably going to be the opposite, but I'm not sure. But I took the test here in Nagano City where I live, and there were 188 people taking the N1, and all of the other levels were just little tiny small rooms off to the side. I did not expect there to be that many people there, because for starters, Nagano's not even that big. Now, with that said, most of the people taking the N1 were of Asian descent, and they do say that if you know kanji already, so like if you're from China or something, or a country that uses Chinese, you're going to have a much easier time on the N1 because you can kind of just BS your way through the whole thing by, because you already know the words, even if you can't read them. Which brings me to the next part. One of the things that a lot of those people will probably have difficulty with if they haven't actually studied Japanese, but they may still be able to pass, by the way. I'm just saying that if their only strength there is reading, it was the listening part. The listening part actually surprised me. When I took the N3 many, many years ago, the listening part was so easy. Like, so easy. I passed that with flying colors, and I honestly expected to get a perfect score on the N1 reading test as well. I did. I expected it. Most of the listening questions were actually, they were super easy. Like, it was silly. It was obvious which the answer was. I actually laughed in a couple just because I'm like, duh. But a few of them, they took me by surprise. The last question was so vague. I still don't know what the answer was. And I sort of like figured it out in the end, and I'm still like, how on earth was I supposed to know on this super long listening question that was what was going to be the question? Bigger problem is, if you're a little bit tired, you're probably going to have some difficulty, because if you zone out for like 5 seconds on the M1 listening test, you're going to miss an important point. And unlike on the earlier tests, I don't know if it's still the same now, but when I took it, on the earlier tests, you got 2 chances to hear the listening part. So you listen to it once, you get a few seconds to think about it, and then they'd play it one more time. They did not do that for the N1. So if you miss it, you missed it. So I'm pretty sure that I probably missed a few on the listening because, one, there was a couple that were super vague that caught me by surprise, and 1 or 2, I might have been zoning out a little bit. Anyway, in some senses, I felt like it was a little bit more difficult than the reading section, but only a couple of them. Now, there's one thing that people say a lot about the N1 that is not incorrect, and that's that reading speed is very important. Now, I always recommend that people don't try to read for speed. Like, don't try to go as fast as you can. I don't think that's enjoyable. I think you're going to burn out fast. But reading speed is extremely important for the N1, I found. There's a ton of reading. So when I started the test, I actually went right to the back of the pamphlet, like starting on maybe question 40 to 60 something. Those are just long reading sections. So you read a big long section, and there's a couple questions about it. So I just skipped right to that section and started there because I knew that's where I'd be, losing the most time. And I actually took my time too much. Like, I don't know if I had too much confidence in my reading speed or what the deal was, but I took my time. I relaxed. That's how I like to take tests. I like to relax and take my time. I literally ignored the clock. But at the end of the test, when I came back to the beginning to do the short grammar questions and stuff, I realized I only had like 30 minutes-ish left. It's a 110-minute test for the reading and the writing section, or just the reading and the grammar and kanji section. And I realized that I might actually have a hard time doing the first 40 questions or whatever that I skipped. And I ended up finishing the last one with 1 minute left of the 110-minute test. So I guess I took my time a little bit too much. I think people recommend that you only really need to skim stuff, but a lot of the answers were really hidden within the long reading sections. Not so much hidden, but like you'd read a long section and the question would be, so what is this guy trying to say? So like if you hadn't read the whole thing, I suppose you could browse it, but I felt like I got a better understanding by just reading the whole thing. So I read like every word on the whole test. So a lot of people don't do that, and maybe you could do better like not doing that and be faster. But I was able to finish with 1 minute left by reading every word on the test. So reading speed is clearly important. And if I had not done my immersion challenges over the past few months, There's no way I would have been able to pass the test at all. I wouldn't have been fast enough. And that was another thing. I was actually super surprised that like a lot of the reading sections were really interesting. Like I found that they're basically just a bunch of opinion pieces about some topic. Some of them are super relevant to the modern world. Some of them are more like, philosophical. But regardless, they were interesting opinion pieces, well written, interesting ideas that I maybe never thought of, or that I never expected someone living in Japan to think of. I mean, I guess that sounds sort of prejudiced, but I don't know. It's just not ideas that seem to be mainstream in Japan, and they were very clearly written and very convincing, to be honest. So I actually really enjoyed going through the reading sections. So rushing through them, don't really recommend it. Instead, I'd recommend trying to improve your speed a little bit, but not by trying to speed read. Instead, what I'd recommend if you're trying to take the N1 is, instead of studying vocabulary and a bunch of extra grammar and just focusing on using flashcards or whatever, instead just read a lot of stuff you're interested in, whether that's playing video games or reading the news if you're into that, or reading blogs that you're interested in, whatever. Just read a lot and you will naturally get faster, as I proved in my recent challenge games where not games, but my challenge videos where I played DS games all day, every day for a month and doubled my reading speed. And then I read manga 4 hours a day for a month and I nearly doubled it again. So just reading more makes you naturally faster. Up until a point, of course. There is a limit to that. But the limit is well past N1 speed, the speed necessary for N1. So read a lot. And that's really all you have to do, I think. Now, with that said, if you start studying Japanese, like if you're starting from day one now and aiming at the N1, and you just start reading a bunch, that may work for some people, but I think for the majority, I'd say the majority, that's like a sure way to burn out, because just maybe with some languages that are like close to your native language, like if you're an English speaker, native speaker, and you are learning Spanish or something, it's close enough, the letters are all the same and stuff, that you could jump into just reading Spanish from day one and you could probably pick up quite a bit over time. With Japanese, with kanji, hiragana, katakana, all that stuff, just literally jumping in day one and starting to try to read native material books, like I said, some people can do it. The majority are going to burn out really fast doing that. So I think it is worth building a base of some grammar, vocabulary, and stuff before you try doing anything like that. And graded reading material that is sort of along the lines of what you've already studied, the beginner grammar and stuff like that, can help you sort of get used to reading so that you can sort of slide into native material a little bit more easier. My website, Tokeniandy, can actually help you with that if you're interested. We aim to build you that base. We get you all the grammar that you really need so that you can jump into native material. And then we have over 100 stories and short articles that go along with those grammar lessons so that you can get practice reading it in context with new vocabulary that you can learn in context, and just get used to reading natural Japanese that is, leveled down a little bit so that you can actually understand it, and hopefully that can get you more comfortable so you can jump into native material like this. If you're interested, tokeniandy.com. Anyway, another misconception that I've heard about the N1 is that it's a bad indicator of how good your Japanese actually is, and that it only shows how good you are at taking tests. I think that's misleading. Now, it's not a good indicator of how good you are at speaking Japanese, because there's no speaking test. But it is a pretty good indicator of how good you are at reading and understanding Japanese. The whole test, as I mentioned earlier, is pretty much just super long chunks of reading and then a couple questions that generally boil down to, what did the person writing this mean? So if you can understand everything you just read, and it is quite natural Japanese, it's not super N1 only specific vocabulary and grammar and stuff. It's actually very naturally written Japanese. If you can understand that, you can easily answer the questions. The questions on these are not as tricky as you think, although once in a while there will be like two answers that they're very similar but are based on like one word or grammar point. They have a slightly different nuance that might make the question wrong. So if you're not perfect on those, you might not get 100 on the test, but I think you can pass the test as long as you can understand what you're reading. The only exception to that, of course, is if you really hate taking tests and you find that you're trembling with fear when the test starts and you can't focus on anything you're reading. Like if you're that bad at taking tests, then yeah, you got to get used to taking tests. But if you can understand what you're reading, you're going to be fine. Regardless, I think if you're interested in taking N1, reading a lot and having fun in Japanese is going to be your best bet of passing it. If you're to the point where you're even thinking about taking N1, throw away all the books. I don't think you really need them. I don't even think they're going to be that helpful. I think if I had just done practice booklets for the N1 and vocabulary flashcards for 3 or 4 months or whatever, ever since I signed up for it, 6 months maybe, I can't remember. If I had just done that, I would have been so sick of Japanese. I don't know if I could have kept doing it, to be honest. And I think I would have quit trying to improve my Japanese again as soon as I finish the test. So I think it's super counterproductive, but that's just my opinion. If you want to see how I prepared for the test for the past couple months, I did these 2 videos over here where I played 3DS games all day, every day for a month, and one where I read manga 4 hours a day for a month as well, although I did have some struggles in that video. If you found this video helpful or interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe if you're interested in seeing what my score was, because I will be releasing a video announcing that whenever those show up. I think it's around the end of January that we should know.